Hello and welcome to the last video where we will be talking about collections and how to use them. As I've said, this is the last video where we'll be covering HashMaps, so if you do not know what is happening and this is the first video that you're seeing, then head on over to the link in the description where you can find a playlist which contains all the videos and start at the beginning. So, with that being said, let's just move on. We have learned what are the hash sets, how to use them and how to actually create a collection that only allows for certain things to go in, namely things which are unique. So those are not very useful whenever we are talking about storing some data in itself, but they are super useful whenever they are used within HashMap. So let's discuss a bit about what a HashMap is. HashMap is a collection that lets you, the programmer, select what should be the key and value in the collection. So in the past, for array list, for example, the key are the indexes. For hash set, they are the hash codes, but we can't really use those, right? But right now, what we can do is create our own selection of things. So let's just use an example, talk a little bit about how we could be using this, and then we're going to create sort of a small application that will let you, or rather set of classes and methods that will let us save some recipes. So let's just use a new hash map and let's see how to use it. So first of all, whenever we were using any sort of collection that had a type, then we had to specify this type, right, within those diamonds. So to create a hash map, first we need to specify what is going to be the key and then the value. For example, I want to create a hash map that stores the word and then the amount of times it appears within a text. So it's going to be a string as a key and then integer, because we always want to use objects within collections. Let's call it word count equals new hash map. So we've got that out of the way, and let's see how we can use it. Let's say that I have a text where word Joe is 2 times. I need to use a method called put, and then what I get to do is to actually, first of all, put in the key and the value. So for example, John appears 2 times. And then let's add another one, the word cat appears 3 times. So that's all very nice. Let's see how actually it works, right? Because right now I have just put 2 elements, I have no clue how it works. Let's see what is available. If I want, so now what actually is happening is that I can use the key, for example, John or cat, to get this value out of the map. So in order to do that, I need to use get method on the map. So word count dot get, and this time I'm going to get John. What I'm expecting to happen is that I will get number 2 printed out by Java, and this is exactly what happens. So using get on a word on any sort of hash map will result in getting the value associated with the key within the map. Next thing that I can do is, of course, delete stuff, or rather remove, and there I can also use a key. And if I do this and I get the size method that we already know, which is present in all the collections, I can just get the size and it's going to be 1. So that's very nice. So very important thing to notice here. I've told you about hash sets, I've told you about array lists, and why actually is hash sets super important when it comes to hash maps. The reason is simple. The keys within a hash map need to be unique. So if we are talking about array lists, for example, they use integers as a key. And it's very hard to actually have duplicate zeros, duplicate ones, twos, threes, fives, etc. But if we're talking about objects, then of course it's way different. So that's where a hash set comes in, because all the keys that we have within a hash map, they are stored within a hash set. So this means that we cannot have any duplicates whenever we are talking about hash map and the keys there. Values, of course, values can be different. Values can be duplicates, that there is no issue with that, but the keys need to be distinct from each other. And what happens when I'm trying to put a value, or rather a key, which already is present within my map? Let me just show you. So right now, if I get word count that get cat, I will get number 3 out of it, as I put it here. But then, if I try to put in a key cat and value 5, let's see what is going to happen, whether it will allow me to do so, because in set it didn't allow me to add up 2 elements, which were the same, but let's see how it's going to behave within a hash map. Let's run it, and there I have it. If I just use the same key 2 times, or even more times, then I will substitute the value itself of the hash map. Of course, this is not really something that I want to do all the time, and the better option will be to use a dedicated method for it, but if you want to, you can just use put in there to just use the same key. Of course, I can always remove something that I've shown you before, and let's talk a little bit about traversing through the hash map. So if we were to use, for example, array list, then we would just use the values of the index to go through the hash map. But here, or rather, sorry, array list. But here we can't really use it. There are indices, and all the keys are within a hash set, meaning that we can't really get the things in the ordering that we have put them in. So that is also a little bit of an issue. But we can actually use the keys to retrieve all the values within a hash map. In order to do that, we're going to need to use the enhanced for that we know from the hash sets. And the way it's going to work is that for string, so for every string that is there, that we are going to name key, within the word count key set. This is a special method that retrieves the hash set that is actually containing all the keys within our map. So for every string, because as you may remember, string is the type of the key. So for every key within word count key set, so within all the keys, let's print out word count that get key, meaning that for every key, print out the value of the map from using this key. So let's delete those lines. Let's just go back to just 2 elements within our map, and let's see how it looks like. Yeah, and we get 3 and 2. And as you can see, once again, it's a set. It's not ordered, meaning that we get random ordering within those 2. So very, very important to remember, within a hash map, elements are not ordered. So very important to remember. So those were very, very simple examples, but of course, examples are not enough. So let's try and do an exercise that will be more educational for you, so that you can see what can you actually do with a hash map, because it's a very, very powerful tool that is in reality, let's say, a sort of a database that you can already build. So with that being said, let's just try and create a simple class that will contain recipes and a list of ingredients. So in order to do that, let's just create a new class called recipe that will have just one field called name of the recipe. Let's create a constructor, and let's create getter and setter. And of course, this is going to be the key in our map, meaning that we need to implement a good equals and hash code. And of course, I'm using the IntelliJ code creation that you can get from alt insert key, and then it will just let you generate the code. So with that being said, we've got a recipe. Let's also do an ingredient, which is also going to be very, very simple. It's going to contain private string name as well, so that it's easy to remember. Of course, you can create way more complicated classes. So here I don't really need equals and hash code. I won't be storing those in any sort of a collection that needs this mechanism. So in order to avoid creating a mess, let's just use it like that. So let's also then just create a new Java class, which is going to be storing our app. And let's call it recipe app. Okay, so the main collection that we're going to be using here is going to be private HashMap that contains recipes, and this is going to be a bit of a shocker, but we can also use array lists, hash sets, hash maps within the type. So let's use array list that will contain ingredients, and let's call it recipes equals new hash map. So very neat trick. We can also store collections with it, so it's a very nice tool. So let's talk a little bit about what we can do. What we can do actually is that we can create a recipe, add a new one, and then of course we can delete something. So let's just create a simple CRUD application, meaning create, read, update, delete from our recipe HashMap. So let's create first class, rather first method, that will actually return Boolean, and it will result in adding up a new recipe. So it's going to be very simple, add recipe. What we'll need is of course a recipe, and then a list of ingredients. And then what we're going to do is just for our recipes list that put recipe and then the ingredients list. Sorry, we need to change the type from list to array list, and everything should be okay. Yeah, nice. And we're going to be returning true just for the sake of principality. So we've got the create part of the create, read, update, delete. Now what we want to do is to retrieve the list of our recipes. So in order to do that, we can just go ahead and return an array list of ingredients, get ingredients of a recipe, and as an argument, what we're going to be using is of course going to be a recipe, and we're going to return recipes, so our main map that we are using here, and then a get, and as an argument here we are going to be of course using the recipe. But here we are going to run into an issue if the recipe is not there, right? So it's very important to first check whether the recipe is actually within the collection. So let's also create a helper method that is going to be private, that will check whether the recipe is within the our recipes map. So let's create a private boolean true false, whether if we find the recipe that we're going to return true, if not we're going to return false. So private boolean is recipe present, and what we're going to do is use recipe, or maybe even better, because our end users which will be using it won't really know what is the name, rather what is the recipe object. They will be using a string. They will be using a string, meaning that they want to only use the name of the recipe. So what we want to do is use the recipe name, and using this recipe name we want to check whether we have this recipe. So in order to do that, we are going to be going through our recipes, compare the name of the recipe with the one that we have gotten. If we got this name, we return true. If not, we return false. So in order to do that, first we need to use an enhanced for on our recipes within our recipes list. So for every recipe that we have within recipes, and now the word I've told the word recipe so many times that it's losing meaning to me, but we of course need to use the key set, because the recipes is a hash map, not a hash set, and we want to go through all the keys that we have. So right now, in order to go forward with it, what we need to do is if the recipe that we see now, that get name that equals the recipe name that we have gotten from the end user, then we are going to return true. And if we go through entirety of the for loop and we do not find it, do not find the name, then what we're going to do is return false because we didn't find the name. So recipe is not present. So with this little method, let's just go ahead and within our get ingredients of a recipe, where we are using recipe name, use something very similar, and then if is recipe present, recipe name, then what we want to do is get the recipe and return it. Then what we are going to be doing is, of course, we need to get the recipe using the name. So we need to just go through the recipe list once again. So recipe within recipes key set. And then if recipe that get name that equals recipe name, return recipe. Or rather recipes that get recipe. Yeah, a bit convoluted, a bit complicated, but what I want to showcase here is how to really traverse through the key set. We don't really need this method, but still it's very pretty and I like the way it looks. So in reality, we are doing the check over here of checking whether the recipe is present, but the way it works is that it will actually do what we want. So about return value, we could either return null or we could return an empty list, and in my taste, I would rather return a new array list which doesn't really have anything in it, but won't break the application by returning null, and we won't get a null pointer exception within, which we'll take care of in the future. So we've got read, we've got create, let's also do delete for the sake of things. So if you want to delete something, then of course what we need to do is create a method that is going to be made for deleting, public void delete recipe, and then what we're going to be using is use recipe for the sake of simplicity, and of course if let's just use recipes that remove recipe. This one shouldn't break even if there is no recipe in there. And if we want to update things, then of course public void update recipes ingredients is going to be just recipe and list of ingredients and recipes that put recipe and ingredients. So very simple CRUD with a bit of an overhead with there is recipe present, but rather maybe let's just make it public to make sure that we can use it. Delete this one from here because it's not used, and actually we are checking this over here. And right now we just have create, read, update, delete with check whether something is within our little collection or not. So yeah, I'm hoping that it has helped you out. Collections are here to stay. They are very, very important within the context of storing data within Java. Of course, there are exercises to also this module which are a bit more complicated and are going to be really using the mechanisms that I have shown you today and in the previous videos. So please go ahead and take care of really understanding the topic. And then, of course, if you want to ask questions, if you want to collaborate with anybody on those questions and all those exercises, then please feel free to join the group at school/DevLaunch. And yeah, see you in the next videos where we are going to be talking about testing, and within the testing, we will actually be using some of the exercises which are within the document that you can find in the description. So thank you very much, have a good day, and see you in the next video.